You're listening to Comic Reflections, episode 306. I'm Nicholas Prom, and today I'm joined by Aqua Rob Kelly from the Aquaman Shrine and the Fire and Water Podcast Network. And we are here to celebrate Steve Skeates' 75th birthday. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Hi, Nicholas. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me. January 29th is Steve Skeates' 75th birthday, and, he's part of that first generation of fans turned pro in comics. But unlike some of his contemporaries like Denny O'Neil and Roy Thomas or Len Wein and Marv Wolfman, he kind of gets short shrift as far as being celebrated, and I think that's kind of crummy, and I've always loved his stuff. And so I just kind of wanted to do this. I can't be the only one who felt that way. I mean, they did award him the Bill Finger Award in 2012, which is kind of specifically for people who are underappreciated. Rob, where did you first come to Steve's work?
Back when I, was first buying comics in the 70s, and then I started getting access to back issues. This again, when I got into comics, comic stores were like, I was like, what? There's a whole store devoted to comic books? That's crazy, And then I would go back and find some older Aquaman comics, and that's when I started realizing who he was, because he, of course, had a great run on the character, and those were all issues that I had to buy, as back issues, and so I would pick up random ones and notice that he wrote them, and he wrote some Aquaman stories for Adventure Comics as well, and as you mentioned, he wrote a million comics. He burned in comics like he burned very brightly, but for a relatively short period of time, as opposed to, as you mentioned, like Dana O'Neil and some others that, got into comics in the 60s and have been in comics ever since, and went on to being an editor. It's like Steve Skeates never did any of that. He basically was just a writer, and then he kind of got out of comics, so I think that's kind of why, I don't want to say he's forgotten, but he just doesn't have, his name isn't on the tip of anybody's tongue of a certain age the way some other writers are, because he just, unless you bought older comics, you just never heard of him anymore. But his run on Aquaman is one of my all-time favorite runs on the character, period. And as you mentioned, he wrote lots of different stuff. I mean, he wrote Plop for DC Comics. He wrote The Hawk and Dove. For DC, for Charlton, he wrote a bunch of different characters. He wrote the Abbott Costello comic book, so he could do humor. He could do plot. He could do Aquaman. He did lots of stuff. He was very versatile.
Oh yeah,
and I like his Aquaman because it's very specific. It's very specific to kind of his persona.
Yeah, and I agree, and I appreciate his versatility. You mentioned his humor stuff. Like he, as a kid. Skeates was more into humor comics like Funny Animal Stuff or Mad, the original Mad, and yeah, he didn't make that transition from writer to editor like all of those other guys of his generation that I mentioned, and maybe that was the trick. But where I came to Steve Skeates' work was not from superhero comics, but reading the horror stories he wrote for Creepy and Eerie from Warren.
Right, yeah, he did a ton of stuff for them. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he did over 70 stories for Warren. He was a very busy guy in the late 60s and throughout the 70s. In my adolescence, I had a period where, okay, I wasn't Moneybags Kelly. I couldn't get comics all the time. So I know, everybody harps on you for this, but
my parents are bewildered by that persona. By the way, when I finally told them about it, they're like, "What?"
Well, they just proactively bought you comics. I was not in that situation, But in my adolescence, I loved comics, from when I was a kid on, but I couldn't get them all the time. And I was always frustrated in adolescence as a kid who didn't have access to money often with superhero comics and the serialized nature of them. Like, oh, okay, I could get a comic every once in a while, but I always get a cliffhanger. So I kind of switched gears over to, like, I discovered EC comic reprints. And so I was like, oh, let me find all this monster stuff, because it's always like, there's always an ending. And then I found like Warren mags at like antique malls and swap meets and started, like just loving on that and collecting that stuff. And that's where I came to Steve Skeates. I didn't read his superhero stuff like for years and years later. He also should be noted he created Lightning, the Thunder Agent for Tower Comics.
Yeah, he worked all over the place. I mean, he was kind of. I think his style was malleable to different kinds of companies. I think that's part of the reason he wrote so heavily for such that kind of concentrated period of time is because he could adapt his style to whatever company he was working for. And he wrote for Marvel too. I mean, he wasn't like he had an identifiable like house style. He could kind of do what he needed to do, as you talked about. He wrote for Warren. I mean, he could write long form Aquaman, but he could also write a 5-page Abbott and Costello story or a 9-page horror story.
Yeah,
he's really talented that way.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that he got that break to go over to DC. Dick Giordano, when he went to DC as an editor, Skeates was one of the handful of people. He says, "Oh no, I got to bring this guy along." Because he was one of his favorite people to have around. He brought Aparo with Skeates and a few others. That Charlton Exodus was crummy for Charlton, but great for DC. But yeah, why don't we talk about these comics? They're both the final issue of an aquatic superhero. But Aquaman 56, which is cover dated April of 1971, according to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, it went on sale January 5th of 1971, and we've got a great Nick Cardy cover. I love this cover.
Yeah, The Creature That Devoured Detroit. This is like Shag's favorite issue of Aquaman. He's talked about this before.
It's very good. But yeah, The Creature That Devoured Detroit, written by Steve Skeates, with a beautiful art by the great Jim Aparo. And one thing that strikes me about the opening of this story is there's a huge exposition dump of while people are watching television for pages, which is really unusual for a comic book story. But I mean, if it's a last issue, I think an editor will just kind of let you do whatever you want as long as it passes the code. I mean, right?
Well, that was pretty much Dick Giordano's style. He was a very hands-off kind of editor in terms of he hired the people he thought were the right person to do the job, and then he let you kind of, I don't want to say do what you want within reason, but he didn't micromanage at that point. Like, he hired Steve Skeates to get a particular kind of book, and Skeates delivered that. And so
yeah.
He was just kind of like, okay, unless there's some, objectively, something to change, he's going to let it go. And you're right. I love how this opens with this couple in the middle of kind of like a boring married life watching the quote unquote Johnny Nevada show. And we learn Aquaman doesn't appear until the final panels of page 3. It's it's a super intro way to start the story.
Oh yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's not, when I say it's weird, I don't mean like it stinks. I really dig it.
Right.
So yeah, and of course we get this great splash panel on page 5, and it's a classic comics trope of here's a monster that you'll never actually see in the story. Mm-hmm. But that's just terrific. And I like the character, the Crusader, that's introduced in this story. He's got a cool looking costume, but it's just the right kind of generic.
Yeah, I mean, again, Aparo, could do all this kind of stuff in his sleep, and he looks like the kind of hero that you might have seen in one of like the Charlton comics, like when they were doing their superheroes. And this is something else of Skeates completely breaking the rules in that this comic introduces a new superhero called the Crusader. He gets his own logo even, thanks to Jim Aparo, and Skeates promptly kills the guy off in the same issue.
Well, it's his character, and I think that's when you just pull something out of thin air, and it's not like some corporate owned property, you can kill it off just as quickly as you introduce it, and that's fine. But yeah, do we want to get into the nitty gritty of this story, or just kind of do an
why not?
Okay. Well, okay, so we've got this ecological crisis going on in Detroit. There's an algae bloom that's threatening to overwhelm the city, which I I love how topical it is because that's a real kind of thing, and to make that something that a superhero has to grapple with is pretty neat. Obviously, algae blooms don't envelop cities, but aside from that, that's like something torn from the headlines. But yeah, Aquaman goes to Detroit to he was supposed to be on the Johnny Nevada TV show, and then leaves the studio because there's a news bulletin says, "Hey, we got this algae bloom problem. It's out of control in Detroit." So he just bails and says, "Well, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I have to do something." And I've got a friend who's a police scientist, so I'll check in with him. Maybe he can help me. But we cut to the Crusader, who's this new superhero, who is busting up and tracking down a car theft ring. And there's some great panels with this guy in action. Jim Aparo is just terrific in his fight choreography. He's up there with Kirby and Gene Colan in my book on that in that regard.
Yeah, I think Kirby. I mean, I'm sorry, Aparo at this time is the top of his game. You know, just perfect stuff.
Oh yeah. But to me, The Brave and the Bold is the best Batman book for just on the strength of Aparo alone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we get back to Aquaman, and he's talking to the police, and they're doing everything they can to try and hold back this algae bloom, but it's not much. But Aquaman's going to go visit his friend Don Powers, who was a police scientist, and turns out he's opened his own science lab that's kind of a big deal. And he finds out that Detroit has been afflicted with a lack of night, like a lack of darkness, and it's because of this satellite that Don Powers' lab has launched. And Don is the Crusader, okay? And he did it to kind of like cut down on crime to make his job easier.
He says crime's down a whopping 38%, so pretty
yeah,
good.
Okay. But it's because of the lack of evening. This algae bloom has gone out of control. The photosynthesis is just going overdrive. And so Aquaman's trying to convince his friend to shut down that satellite, and of course he won't do it. Fights a bunch of lab assistants, and Don has his friend Aquaman dumped in the park. I gotta wonder about these lab techs. And like, is this really part of my job description? But anyway, we learned that the Don, aka the Crusader, is he dreamed up the satellite not only to help himself fight crime, but also because he's losing his eyesight. He's going blind. And but he hopes he can, bust up this car theft ring, as kind of like his blaze of glory. Never mind the ecological consequences of what's going on. So there's a lot of layers to this. I like how socially environmentally conscious Skeates is, and how he's bringing this into the story. But anyway, Aquaman comes to, and he saves a child from being devoured by algae. The Crusader, of course, he collapsed or tripped and fell off the roof, and he's dead. So his blaze of glory, forget it. So Aquaman, with no one to stop him, busts back into Don's lab and hits the destruct button, because every satellite or scientific piece of equipment has a self-destruct button, and blows up the satellite to have this Deus Ex Machina destroy the algae bloom. It's such an abrupt ending, but I really enjoy this comic.
Yeah, it's a short story. I mean, it's only something like 20 pages long, and so yeah, it is a little bit. It's like once the satellite is blown up, that's it. That's the end of the story. But it's okay. I mean, the gist of it is, the threat of just get rid of the satellite, and of course, presumably Skeates might have handled the aftermath in a future issue, but
sure.
We didn't get to that because this is the last issue of the series, at least for the next 7 years.
Right, and then when it came back, wasn't it only for another 8 or 10 issues?
Yeah, it came back in 1977 with the same numbering, with Aquaman number 57, and then it died after number 63, part of the DC implosion.
Right.
So they didn't know this was the last issue. Carmen Infantino basically canceled Aquaman partially out of a fit of pique with Dick Giordano.
Oh.
Giordano wanted to leave the company and work from home, and he wanted to be like a freelance editor, and Infantino apparently was like, no, we don't have freelance editors, so I'm canceling all your books, even though Aquaman was actually selling pretty well at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's Infantino's managerial style in a nutshell. He did a lot of stuff like canceling books, not because they weren't selling, but because he was mad at somebody.
Yeah.
Which is crappy, and it's a good thing Jeanette Kahn came along and turned things around, because that's no way to run a business.
I always feel like this is one of the early examples of how Aquaman could never catch a break, because I think part of it, when you think about the 70s, all of his other fellow Justice Leaguers had ongoing titles, Flash, Green Lantern, of course, and then the big three, and Aquaman never got that chance. So his title, he didn't have a chance that by the time the Crisis came around, he didn't have one of those long-running books that was in like the hundreds of issues by that point, because he got screwed here by Carmen Infantino and canceling his book, and people liked it. It wasn't like it wasn't selling. So poor, and Aquaman, after this book getting canceled, was basically not in any DC titles for like the next 4 or 5 years until he appeared again in Adventure Comics.
Oh, see, I was going to ask you about that. Did he have any backups in Adventure or something in between the ending of this series and the revival in the late 70s?
Between this and when he came back in Adventure in 1974, he was only in Justice League and then eventually in Super Friends. But for a couple of years there, he was the only book he appeared in was Justice League. That was it.
Man, that's pretty weak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what a crappy way to end a stellar run on this book, because the Skeates and Aparo Aquaman issues just can't be beat.
Yeah, they were a great team. I mean, him and Aparo and Giordano called themselves SAG. A lot of the issues were credited to SAG, and it was Skeates, Aparo, Giordano, because they were really a great cohesive unit. Aparo did pencils, inks, and letters. Skeates wrote it, and Giordano edited it, and it was just that run 40 through 56 is still some of my favorite Aquaman comics of all time, and I've read 10,000 Aquaman comics at this point, but I still think they hold up remarkably well, and amazingly, never been collected anywhere. They have never been put in a trade paperback.
Well, I mean, isn't some of it in the Death of a Prince trade paperback?
Not these.
Really?
Yeah, that only reprints the stuff from Adventure Comics, which Skeates wrote and Aparo drew, but none of these.
Oh, that's really too bad.
Yep.
I've read some of those in the digest format, and those are great stories, but that's crummy. Hopefully, maybe we'll see the turnaround with this, with the Aquaman movie coming out. Was it this year or next?
In December of this year, yeah. Yeah, I hope so. There's no reason. When they started doing the showcases, they started with Aquaman #1, and I was like, oh, they're finally going to get to this book, and then the showcases ended, I kid you not, at number 39, and the issue where Skeates and Aparo and Giordano take over is number 40. So it literally ended right as they were about to get to these, and then the showcases stopped. That's
too bad. In the showcases, they gave. I mean, Superman got a short shrift in that series too. I mean, they end around 1963 or 4, and it's like there's several more years of really great Superman stories that ought to be collected that aren't. Like the introduction of the Parasite in 1966. But I love the showcases, but it's like they end too soon for a lot of series.
Yeah, a couple of these were reprinted in Adventure Comics Digest, again, as you mentioned, and that's how I discovered them when I was a kid, in 1981, 82. I bought them off the stands, and I was like, oh, these are all Aquaman stories I never read, and they reprinted like the first 4 or 5. And then Adventure Comics as a digest got canceled, and they never finished it. But that is the only place they've ever been reprinted, is in those digests.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's only been reprinted in those digests, and that's it's crummy.
Yeah.
But hey, Rob, I want to take a quick promotional break, and then we'll come back and talk about our next issue.
Okay.
Okay.
Film and Water Podcast, a weekly show about movies old and new, hosted by obsessive movie nerd Rob Kelly and a rotating series of special guests. From sci-fi to horror, dramas to family films, comedies to adventure epics, we watch it all. The Film and Water Podcast is part of the Fire and Water family of podcasts, available weekly at fireandwaterpodcast.blogspot.com and on iTunes and Stitcher.
Attention, attention all personnel. New from the Fire and Water Podcast Network, it's MASHcast. Hosted by MASH megafan Rob Kelly and a rotating cast of VIPs, MASHcast analyzes, episode by episode, the greatest television series of all time, MASH. Find MASHcast on fireandwaterpodcast.com.
Jocularity, jocularity.
And we're back to talk about Submariner number 72. This is cover dated September of 1974, but according to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, it went on sale June 18th, 1974. We've got a cover penciled by Larry Lieber and John Romita, and the inker is kind of in question. It could have been Al Milgrom or Mike Esposito, or John Romita himself, but we're just not sure about that. But anyway, the story is called From the Void It Came, and of course it was written by Steve Skeates, penciled by Dan Adkins, and inked, unfortunately, by Vince Colletta. And it's a shame because, Colletta is kind of like the rush job half-asser of inkers. And Dan Adkins is actually a fine penciler. He was one of Wally Wood's many assistants, and when he's got a solid inker, you can really see some of the those Wally Wood-like traits and a lot of the things that he learned from Woody, which unfortunately aren't on display very much here. But I don't know. I like this issue less than the Aquaman one. Despite loving Namor, this is a good comic, but it's not it's not awesome. There is some really cool prose in this, though. I really like the opening paragraphs and such. But yeah, in the Aquaman issue, about 4 years earlier, Aquaman hit a self-destruct button on that satellite and ended the series and the problem. Here we have an alien consciousness come in contact with a satellite that also gets exploded with the touch of a button, and the same inner monologue as, coincidentally, of course, as Aquaman in that last page of Aquaman 56, which is such a fun bit of synchronicity that Skeates says, okay, I'm assigned to write the last issue of an aquatic superhero. Why not have a little fun and connect the two?
I love it. I love that this Submariner comic features essentially the same exact panel. We see a gloved hand touching the self-destruct button, except here the glove is painted blue, not green.
Right.
And I love how quickly Skeates just dismisses this whole action, because there's a caption where it says, who that man is and why he wished to destroy the satellite, that need not concern us. And I just just forget about it. It doesn't matter. But I mean, the story literally picks up where Aquaman number 56 left off. Like, that is such a baller move of Steve Skeates to, cross over a DC Marvel comic book completely unofficially. I love how impish that is. And I think that says something about Skeates himself, that he just didn't take any of this too terribly seriously, which is really fun. Yeah,
I mean, it's still a job, but I mean, we're talking about people in spandex punching people. I mean, so yeah, why not have a little fun? And I think it's early enough in the story that if you're not unless you're really paying attention to every minute detail, you might think, oh, maybe we'll hear about something, later. But we kind of get involved enough in the remainder of the story that you can kind of forget about this exploding satellite bit. That's just the method for this creature to come to Earth.
Exactly. He just wants he just wants this slime thing to land to Earth, and by page 4, it's already done that, and it's really then it's all a Namor story. And of course, this is back before back issues were a thing, so I mean, he would have to assume a lot of people that were reading this didn't even read the Aquaman comic, had no idea about it. I never discovered this until many years later. I think by the time the internet was around and somebody made the connection, and then I was like, oh, well, because I never read Submariner when I was a kid growing up, so I never knew that he did this. I think it's just bizarre synchronicity that they are both in the final issue of each of their respective titles. That's hysterical.
Oh, yeah. And there's a lot of Easter eggy kinds of things like that in 70s comics. I think Steve Gerber did a lot of crap like this too. I mean, by crap, I mean I love it, but but yeah, I like you say, I love how just impish and just nobody will notice me doing this.
Mm-hmm. It's like when Roy Thomas did the Squadron Sinister and stuff like that. All these, these kind of not distaff, but all these alternate versions of Marvel or DC characters. I thought it was a great way to kind of kid the audience a little, because by then, comic fans were kind of becoming a thing, and you could recognize that they were like, oh, these are meant to be, over in Justice League when they introduced Silver Sorceress and Wanjinda, and you're like, oh, those are meant to be the Avengers, I guess.
Yeah, and and the 70s is the boom time for comics fandom. This grassroots thing has really taken hold, and people who are into comics are really into comics. Mm-hmm. And this kind of minutia are wonderful little gifts from the creators to the fans. Because if you catch this, as a fan, this is what a treat, But yeah, anyway, this slime thing gains consciousness and shape, and anyway, Namor gets he's brooding. Surprise,
of course.
And by the way, I love the Namor with clothes costume more than the.
I love that outfit that he has. That blue thing with the wings. It's such a great costume.
I love it too, and I'm glad that a few years back when he got his own book again for a while, they brought it back. Why wouldn't this guy not wear? Why would this guy not wear pants all the time or a shirt? What there is of the shirt, but yeah, I love this costume. I wish they kept it forever, but Namor brooding gets pestered by some roughnecks on the dock, and while he's fighting these guys off, which is not much work for a prince of the blood, the Submariner, this slime thing just comes up out of nowhere and kind of gets mixed up in this melee, and then the roughnecks kind of disappear. And, Namor has punchy for several pages with this slime thing before it blinds him temporarily. And during the fight, then the thing's head pops off. What's that about?
That's because I love that Namor squeezes it so hard that it pops its head off. That's great. I love that. That's just a great panel where they just and the thing goes pop. It just shoots it off. It's fantastic. Because Namor was always way more powerful in his universe than Aquaman. Aquaman is strong. Nowadays, he's even almost like Superman level. But in the 70s, Aquaman was pretty strong, but he was lower tier. But in the Marvel universe, Namor was always up there. He was getting in toe to toes with the Hulk and stuff. So yeah. He was a way stronger character.
Yeah, I love how they've played up why wouldn't Aquaman be super strong? He has to have the muscle density to withstand not only the pressures of the ocean depths, but being able to swim in it. But yeah, so I like now that I don't know about giving him Superman level strength, but giving him the credit, like, yeah, of course this guy has super strength. He would have to.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Namor had the traditional strength of 100 men kind of thing, going back to the Golden Age, which is cool. But yeah, he beats the slime thing. How is it that he regains his sight? Particles of the creature are swirling in the water, and it restores his sight? Is that it?
Yeah, the creature shows mercy, and from thousands of miles away restores his foe's sight. So basically, the creature does it.
Oh, okay. All right.
Just in time for Namor to get back to Atlantis and find almost everybody there unconscious. So something's attacked Atlantis.
Yeah, and we won't know until he shows up in a guest appearance somewhere. What's the story with that? But yeah,
another book that ends on a cliffhanger. Another seafaring superhero book that ends on a cliffhanger.
Right, or at least with plenty of things unresolved.
Yeah.
But yeah, pretty fun comic. I think the Aquaman issue definitely has more weight and substance to it. I think it's more rereadable, has more value in that aspect. But not a bad issue. I mean, this I always have fun with a Steve Skeates comic. I'm never like, oh man, that was lame. He's one of those guys that you can just kind of count on for comic book fun, which I appreciate.
Yeah, he delivers a lot of twists and turns. One of the things I like about these two issues, especially when you compare them back to back, and we talked earlier about Skeates' versatility, is the story he wrote for the Aquaman comic is a very typical, I don't want to say typical, it sounds like a bad thing, but like he's writing in a DC style, and in Marvel, he wrote in like a Marvel style, because the Aquaman story is very plot driven. It's about, Aquaman getting to this, to that, and then this guy, and he's going to stop the satellite, blah, blah, blah. And the Marvel one is much more navel-gazing, because a big part of the Submariner story is about how he rushes ahead to fight the creature as opposed to trying to communicate with it and understand it. And that's like the whole Marvel, like, Namor was never one of Marvel's more self-reflective characters.
Right.
But here, he's chastising himself because he didn't do that thing, and that's like Marvel melodrama. So that's not something you would have seen in a DC comic in 1970. So it's like even when he's writing two versions of the same character, like the ocean character, the water character, he still finds a way to make it fit in the way that company would write that particular story. And so Skeates was just that good. He could write that kind of story. I mean, Aquaman would have done that later on, would chastise himself, stuff like that. But in 1970, not so much. So I love that he writes two different sorts of styles, even within a sort of, again, an unofficial two-part. I think that's great.
Yeah, I appreciate the versatility there, and it also speaks to his ability to take direction. I mean, Dick Giordano and Roy Thomas are two different kinds of editors. I don't think Roy was like a tyrant or anything. He learned not to do that from his experiences with Mort Weisinger, but he was very much Stan Lee Jr. As an editor, and maybe a bit more academic, but he was a teacher after all, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Or is that Denny O'Neil? That was Denny.
I thought Roy was as well. I could be wrong.
No, I think you're right. Okay, I'm crazy, but yes. Sometimes I cross the streams a bit when people's backstories are a bit similar. So
yeah, well, you would figure a lot of writers probably have that background of
yeah.
English majors or history majors and stuff like that. So
yeah, but yeah. Anyway, I think we're probably pretty good for a wrap up here. I just wanted to wish happy 75th birthday to Steve Skeates. Wish you many happy returns, and Rob, thank you so much for joining me today to do this. We talked about doing this quite some time ago, and I'm glad I remembered.
Well, thank you very much. I'm a huge fan of Steve's from long ago, and I've had a chance to interview him and talk to him, and he's always been nothing but nice to me, which is wonderful. And I have an Aquaman Slurpee cup signed by him, which is great.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, he's just a really great guy. Every time I've ever had a question for him, just out of nowhere, I'll write to him and he'll always answer back. He's just a terrific guy, and I'm still such a fan of his work. And so yeah, it's great. I'm happy that he's 75 years old, as he describes himself. He's like an old hippie.
Oh yeah,
he's just kind of I love that about him, and I love that. I'm glad that his stuff is getting revitalized. Like people are noticing again. And like as you said, I hope with Aquaman coming out at a movie this year that they finally get to reprint his stuff from this run, because it's worthy of being rediscovered. It's really great, fun comics.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Steve's approachability. I mean, I'm friends with him on Facebook, and he's definitely put up with my fanboyishness, like
right.
Asking me like, so what was it like when you first met Wally Wood? And I'm just like my mind is exploding as he's relating that story to me. He was very patient, and he's really a great guy. And wish him all the best.
Absolutely.
All right, folks. Rob, where can people find you on the internet?
All of my shows are over on our network site, which is fireandwaterpodcast.com, and there I co-host several shows. I do Fire and Water Podcast with Shag and Digest Cast with Shag, and I also do Superman Movie Minute with Chris Franklin and Power Records Podcast with Chris Franklin, and then I do my own shows, Treasury Cast and Pod Dylan and Film and Water Podcast, and then I also have MASH Cast coming out very soon.
Yes, and folks, these are all great shows. I listen to them all. I love them. Yes. So this is the first episode of Comic Reflections from the new year, and also since I've started my new job, I think, with the Postal Service, going to be more of an occasional podcast now. But hopefully you'll stick around. I'm still doing the Marvel Saga podcast on the side with my friend Jerry McMullen, and that will be coming out regularly. So, yeah, I've not faded. Don't worry, folks. But anyway, this has been Comic Reflections. Until next time, we'll see you in the funny pages.
Trekker Talk, a fan podcast devoted to the adventures of 23rd century bounty hunter Mercy St. Clair from the pages of Trekker Comics by creator, writer, and artist Ron Randall. I'm Darren.
And I'm Ruth. We'll be discussing the stories, characters, and art in this excellent retro sci-fi adventure series, as well as having side conversations about other areas of fandom.
We hope you'll join us as we travel from the dangerous back streets of New Galuf to the depths of outer space and everywhere in between.
Trekker Talk is available at podbean.com and on iTunes and Stitcher.
Find us at trekkertalk.com.
You like cheap comic books, right? Well, I'm Professor Allen, and I talk about cheap comic books on the Quarterbin Podcast. In every episode, I'll dissect a single comic from my collection, as long as I paid no more than 25 cents for the issue. Forget about $4 new comics that you can read in 4 minutes, or crossover events that can cost $100 to collect. Join me in the Quarterbin, where even bad comics are a bargain, and good ones are a steal. The Quarterbin Podcast is part of the Relatively Geeky Podcast Network. Visit us at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search Relatively Geeky or Quarterbin Podcast in iTunes. I guarantee it'll be worth every penny.